Hey, what is up, everybody? Michael Crump back here again, talking about the latest and the greatest in PlayStation homebrew news and much, much more. So, today I wanted to provide an update to my guide that covers every single firmware for the PlayStation 4 and for the PlayStation 5. And this is typically regarding whether or not you should keep the system or you should sell the system. Now, before we jump into things, let me ask you to please hit the like button on this video as well as subscribe to my channel. I would love to have you here, and with that being said, let's just jump straight into it. And so starting from the bottom and going up, if you have a system that is on 1.x or 2.x, that is a very rare system. Keep it as is. I would absolutely not recommend that you upgrade it to a 5.05 or anything such as that. They're going to be worth even more money in the future, especially to different types of collectors. I have seen the earlier versions of the PlayStation 4s going for in the thousands range, so you would be able to make quite a bit of money if you just held on to it, regardless that you do have an option that you could upgrade it to the golden firmware. So next up is going to be PS4 systems that is on 3.x or 4.x. Now, these, for the most part, they're still rare. I would go ahead and upgrade those to 5.05. And really, you're not getting that much more money if you sell a PlayStation 4 on 3.x or 4.x versus, an actual 5.05 system. I would definitely just go ahead and upgrade it. Now, if you do keep a 3.x or a 4.x system, you will be able to obviously get more money for it as time goes by, but it's definitely not going to be in that 1.x or that 2.x range of money. Next up for the PlayStation 4, again 5.05. This is what most of us consider to be the golden firmware, meaning that you don't have to do things such as use a USB stick to exploit it. All you really need is just the system on 5.05 and a web browser, and well, for the most part, you can play pretty much any game that has came out for it. So you have a lot of additional flexibility if you do have one on 5.05. Also, the exploit in and of itself is very stable. It's just going to run perfect. It's going to be a great experience. And now you may note that I do not have a 5.x on here, and really what that means is that obviously if you were in the early 5s, you would want to go to 5.05, and if you were anything higher than 5.05, you would want to follow the next set of guidance, which would be update to 9.00. Now, this next one here is probably going to cause a bit of controversy, but I've said this before and I will stick with this again today. For a 6.72 system, I would absolutely go ahead and upgrade that to 9.00. Now, the only thing that I did note in here is that unless you really don't want to buy something like an ESP32-S2 device, which is going to do your USB emulation, then I would stay on that 6.72. But from my experience, most of the backports are really only fully tested with 9.00 and 5.05. Now, you may be saying, but Michael, you have a 6.72. I've seen it on your Twitter, and that is correct. I do have a 6.72, but it is kind of sitting in the closet right now as I have multiple PlayStation 4s. So a lot of this guidance that you hear is those that are in these situations where maybe they only have one console. Now, if you do happen to stay on that 6.72, just keep in mind you are going to run into bugs and other sorts of things like that that you probably won't get an immediate fix for. As I stated, most people that's using the systems today are running more current operating system versions such as 9.00. Next up is for PS4 7.x or 8.x. There is absolutely no reason to stay on anything in the 7s or in the 8s. Go ahead and go straight to 9.00. Obviously, 9.00 is the jailbreak that we know and love, and it's becoming extremely stable. There really isn't anything that I found that I can't do on a 9.00 system that I would want to do. So obviously, if you have 9.00, you are in a great shape for the PlayStation 4. Now, this next one, which is 9.03, this is the only one that I will really mention this opportunity to downgrade. So if you didn't know, there is a method that does require you opening the PlayStation 4, soldering a couple of wires, using some software, and then reverting back to the previous firmware that was located on the systems. So with a 9.03 system, you know for a matter of a fact the previous firmware that was on it was at least 9.00 or earlier. And so only for a 9.03 system would I recommend you go ahead and do the downgrade process. Now, maybe you had a 9.00 system and maybe a kid came in and maybe they upgraded it to 10.50. Well, with that, since you know exactly the previous version of the firmware, then you could obviously downgrade that one back to the 9.00. But as you can see right here, really everything between the 9.04 to all the way the 9.60, it is an absolute huge risk to try to downgrade those systems unless you know what version that they were coming from. If there were to be a jailbreak for it, I still believe if you're in the 9s, then at least there may be an opportunity. Whereas my guidance for anything that's really in the 10s is going to be to just go ahead and sell the system. The amount of time that it's going to take to get a jailbreak from those versions is going to be, I would say, probably years. So the decision is yours, but if I did have anything in the 10s, I would not be waiting around anymore. I would just go ahead and I would sell it. And so that's pretty much going to wrap up the PlayStation 4 section. And so let's just go ahead and we'll start from the bottom and work our way up to the top. So obviously, if you have a 1.x or a 2.x PlayStation 5, those are already rare. And I would absolutely keep those systems as is. Do not in any way, shape, or form upgrade them even to a 3.20 or to a 4.03. Keep those systems right where they're at. Now, I'm already seeing a 1.x system starting around in the early 1000s for the price range. Again, I know the system itself is 500, but you're already looking at a bit of a doubled value just by having one on a 1.x or a 2.x. Next up is the 3.x. Now, what we know of today, at least with the IPv6 kernel exploit, is that for firmware such as 3.00 or 3.10, which is listed as partial, to 3.20 to 3.21, those have full support. And you can do things such as enable debug settings, and there's some customization around theming that you can do. Obviously, you can't run any sort of game packages like we can on the PlayStation 4, but my guidance here is obviously if you are in the 3.x, leave those systems exactly where you're currently at today. It does seem like version 3.20 has a lot better support for the current IPv6. And again, I just believe that that's just because there's more people that actually has that system today. Next up is for the 4.x series. Now, again, this is the partial jailbreak, meaning that we've got kernel access, but we obviously do not have the ability to bust through the hypervisor. Now, there's a number of support for 4.00, 4.02, 4.03, 4.50, and 4.51. And again, you can do the same sort of things such as enable the debug settings, do some like theming, and some minor tweaks like that. Then absolutely keep the system as is. You don't want to upgrade it. Even if you are on a 4.00, you don't want to upgrade to 4.03 right now. Always remember, the lower the firmware, the better. Now, for version 5.00, I do think that there is a high possibility of an exploit with this firmware. But I also know that there isn't that many people that actually has 5.00 systems. But again, if you have a 5.00 system, you absolutely do not want to upgrade it any further. This also applies to a few of the other firmware. So 5.02, I think you also have a pretty good possibility of an exploit, and again with 5.10. Now, I do believe that if you are higher than 5.10, if you are in the 5.50, then you would more than likely want to just go ahead and sell that PlayStation 5, because I don't think that you're going to see absolutely anything coming for that for years. And pretty much all known attack vectors have already been patched by that point. So, as most of the work is being done over here in the 4.x or the 3.x version. Now, I absolutely think that there is no reason to keep a PlayStation 5 on a 6.x or a 7.x unless you want to upgrade that to the very latest firmware. A 6.x and a 7.x system, I believe we're looking at absolute years before we see any sort of vulnerability that comes out for that. So now I've went through every single firmware for the PlayStation 4 and for the PlayStation 5, and at least my guidance on what I think I would do if I were in your situation for any of these firmwares. Again, I hope this video helps somebody out there, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you on the next one. Michael out.